The story of Abraham and Sarah's family is not the story of super people. It is the story of ordinary people, with all the baggage that comes with being part of an ordinary family. And yet, it's a family given an extraordinary mission. For reasons known only to God, God chose this family to bear God's gift of blessing to the world. In today's episode, the story reaches its climax, and we get a significant clue to what God is up to. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. In yesterday's episode, Joseph's brothers sold Joseph into slavery to a passing caravan of Ishmaelites heading to Egypt. The brothers returned to their father Jacob to report that Joseph had been eaten by a lion. And of course, Jacob was distraught, for apparently Joseph was his favorite son. Now the story follows Joseph's strange fortunes in Egypt, beginning as a slave and ending up as Pharaoh's second in command. The story goes something like this. When Joseph arrived in Egypt, one of Pharaoh's officers, a certain Potiphar, bought him as his servant. Potiphar quickly discovered Joseph's talents and put him in charge of his entire household. In time, though, Joseph caught the eye of Potiphar's wife, who tried repeatedly but unsuccessfully to seduce him. She kept after him until one day, when he again refused her advances, she grabbed his tunic. Joseph immediately ran away from her, but unfortunately for Joseph, his tunic came off as he ran, leaving his clothing in her hands, an apparent smoking gun pointing to his guilt. Out of apparent spite, Potiphar's wife showed him Joseph's tunic. An enraged Potiphar had Joseph thrown into jail. But once again, Joseph proved his worth. The jailer entrusted to Joseph's care all the welfare of all the other prisoners. Now, at some point, the royal cupbearer and the royal baker both managed to offend Pharaoh, and they landed in jail, setting the stage for Joseph's skills in interpreting dreams. The two men shared with Joseph dreams that they had had, and Joseph actually interpreted them. The royal cupbearer will be restored to his position, while the royal baker will be executed. Well, a couple of years pass, and Pharaoh has a dream himself, a dream that he cannot interpret. His royal cupbearer finally remembered Joseph and commended him to Pharaoh. Joseph was summoned before Pharaoh, who recounted his dreams to Joseph. Joseph interpreted the dreams to Pharaoh as portending 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph then recommended that Pharaoh immediately undertake a project to begin storing food for 7 years, so that when the years of famine would come, there would be enough food to sustain his people. So pleased was Pharaoh with this suggestion that he elevated Joseph to be Pharaoh's own second in command. All of which brings us to the return and the reunion between Joseph and his brothers. When the famine finally hit, it hit hard. Jacob sent his brothers to Egypt to buy and bring back enough grain to see them through the famine. When they arrived in Egypt, they appeared before Joseph, who controlled the store of grain. They don't recognize Joseph, but he recognized them, and he hatched a plot to trick his brothers into returning to Canaan and then coming back with their youngest brother, Benjamin. In one last trick, Joseph planted his silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and then when the brothers departed once again for Canaan, Joseph sent his steward to catch them and arrest them. Suffice it to say that in the twists and turns of his plot, he had his brothers all twisted up, pleading for Benjamin's freedom. At this point, Joseph couldn't keep himself hidden from them anymore, and in a highly emotional scene, he revealed himself to his brothers. We read, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, 'Send everyone away from me.' So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come closer to me. And they came closer. He said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep you alive for many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the lands of Egypt. Well, Joseph's brothers, as you might imagine, were scared to death. The brother they had sold into slavery now had the power of life and death over them. But instead of seeking revenge, he was overjoyed with their reunion, rightly perceiving that what they had done was really part of a divine plan to ensure the family's survival through a famine. The reasons he cannot be angry with them is that they were ultimately doing God's will. All of which nicely summarizes this entire Abraham family saga. What looks to us like a lot of shenanigans, backbiting, and family skullduggery turns out to fit into God's plan for their ultimate salvation in order that they may fulfill God's purpose of redemption for the world. Turns out that in spite of our worst efforts, God uses us, even us, for God's purpose of bringing God's blessings to the world. Now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.